If you are not comfortable with having your video or your voice on the recording, feel free to keep your camera off and your mic on mute. And we'll try to make sure there's no background noise as well on our end here. See, some folks are still saying hello in the chat. Feel free to jump in the chat and let us know where you're joining us from or what your lake of interest is. Hi, Myrna. Hi, Brenda. That's great. Thanks everyone for joining us on this Monday, the last day of the fiscal year for us. And I know it's a busy, busy time for folks. So pleased that folks were able to join us today. This, of course, is a continuation of our Lake Stewardship Community of Practice project. And we are continuing that with the discussion on recreational carrying capacity with some work out of the Lake Windermere Ambassadors Society, which I'm excited to hear about. I'm joining you from Treaty 6 territory here in Edmonton, and this is also the North Saskatchewan region of the Otipemisiwak Métis government. So I just want to, of course, as we always do, kind of ground us in the discussion today. The lakes that we talk about are traditional territories for gathering, hunting, spirituality. And today we're talking really about how many lakes or how many boats should we be putting on these lakes. And so just to ground us all in that, our conversation today is one that I feel really privileged to be able to be talking about and recognizing that the spaces we're talking about are really important traditional territories. If you're not familiar with the Alberta Lake Management Society, I'm sure many of you are, because that's how you probably found out about our webinar, although we might have some folks joining us from BC as well. Our main objective here is ensuring that we have healthy lakes for Alberta's future, and you can see here, we always have a great team of folks. We've got a few of them on the call today. I think we've got Brittany, Kirsten Latender, Kristen Perrin, a couple of our staff here on the call, and they are helping out in the background to make sure the webinar runs smoothly. And then we also have Kelsey Norton joining from the North Saskatchewan Watershed Association. And Kelsey has been instrumental in planning and delivering our Lake Stewardship Community of Practice meetings. So a huge thank you to Kelsey, who is hiding away in the background there, but always is here to help make sure these run smoothly and help with the planning of them as well. For those who weren't at our 2024 conference in Hinton, we did engage our conference attendees on the challenge of designing research questions for lakes. And we did that with Dr. David Barrett from the University of Calgary. And we asked folks, what are the questions that you really want answered about your lake? Who do you think should answer them? What capacity or timeline would be required to answer those questions? And what we heard back from folks was largely that questions around lake recreation were top of mind for people. I expected that most questions would be around water quality, but in fact, recreation was one of our top subjects that emerged from that exercise. And because of that, the last 3 webinars that we've hosted on the Lake Stewardship Community of Practice have been on the theme of recreation. If you caught our webinar last Wednesday, you would have heard from a researcher in Ontario studying the relative impact of wakes from boats versus waves from wind on shoreline erosion, which was really fascinating. And then prior to that, we heard from Safe Quiet Lakes on issues related to regulations around recreation on lakes. So we're excited to continue that discussion today based on some of the feedback that you provided us at our conference. And of course, water quantity was the #1 issue that people had top of their mind at that conference. And so moving into the next year, we look forward to bringing you some webinars on the topic of water quantity as well. Here's just some examples of the questions we heard about from that exercise. The #1 question on the top here, what is the boating capacity on small lakes? And this is a question that our speaker has been exploring. So of course, that's why we've brought in our speaker today. If you missed any of the previous webinars, I encourage you to check those out on our website. You can see here just a quick screenshot of our website and the video from last week's webinar. So if you've missed any of those, all of them are archived on our website. I encourage you to check those out. So just a rough agenda for today. If there's time for breakout rooms, then certainly we'll jump into breakout rooms and have discussions in smaller groups. And if not, we'll just continue the discussion as a larger group here today. So we'll keep it pretty flexible and make sure that the presentation and discussion are really productive. So just as a quick introduction to our guest speaker today, Pam Saunders is the program manager with the Lake Windermere Ambassadors. With a background in environmental science and a passion for aquatic ecosystems and stewardship, she leads citizen science monitoring programs, public education initiatives, and collaborative efforts to protect and sustain Lake Windermere and the Columbia River headwaters. So with that, I invite Pam to share your screen and take it away. If there are questions, feel free to throw them in the chat, but we'll pass those on to Pam following her presentation.
All right, thank you.
I'll let you know when it's looking good here. Yeah, I can see the full presentation mode and I can hear you okay. So yeah, go for it, Pam.
Perfect. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak with you and join you on your webinar today. And I just wanted to say thanks to everyone else for choosing to spend your afternoon learning about the Lake Windermere Ambassadors and some findings from our recreational carrying capacity study. So just a little info on us, if you're not familiar with who we are. The Lake Windermere Ambassadors are a community-based nonprofit environmental stewardship society working in the East Kootenay region of BC. The ambassadors have a vision of an ecologically healthy Lake Windermere with a balanced management approach that supports recreation, traditional uses, high fish and wildlife values, and also economic prosperity in the region. LWA has also been appointed to the role of the Lake Management Committee by our local governments, where we encourage and implement policies and guidelines found in the Lake Windermere Management Plan. And so with that little intro, we'll get into it here. So just a little bit about our location. Our work occurs on the traditional unceded territories of the Ktunaxa and Secwepemc, and we also acknowledge and thank our very supportive local First Nation communities, the Akiskanick and the Shuswap bands, for their support. So Lake Windermere is not actually a true lake. It's actually just a very shallow widening of the Columbia River that flows northward through the Rocky Mountain Trench, and it's located between Fairmont Hot Springs and Invermere. So just on the map there, the lake to the north, the top lake, that's Lake Windermere, and then south of there, you'll see a second lake, which is the true headwaters of the Columbia River, and that is Columbia Lake. So although Lake Windermere is still considered one of the two headwater lakes, the true headwaters is Columbia Lake, about 50 kilometers south of us. Getting into wetlands and the flyaway there, so you can see the picture of the Columbia wetlands at the top, and then the 4 flyaway migration routes on the bottom there. So Lake Windermere flows northwards into the world-renowned Columbia wetlands. This is one of the longest intact wetlands in North America, and one of the longest dam-free spaces on the Columbia River. It's also designated a Ramsar Site of International Significance. It's a very ecologically important area, and you can see part of the Pacific. This area is part of the Pacific Flyaway, which is a critical migratory route that stretches from Alaska to Patagonia. So the wetlands serve as an essential stopover for millions of birds, offering crucial resting places during their long migrations. Um, and these wetlands and the wetlands between the two lakes currently have a towing ban and a horsepower restriction. So there's no towing, and you're only allowed to use 20 horsepower on the main river channels. However, when they made the restrictions, they did not include Lake Windermere or Columbia Lake. So looking at Lake Windermere, it's an extremely popular spot for aquatic recreation due to its warm waters and its proximity to major cities. It's very shallow, with just an average depth of only 3.4 meters and a maximum depth of 6.4 meters. So a lot of people find that quite surprising. It's 17.7 kilometers long and 1 to 2 kilometers wide, depending which part of the lake you're at. About 95% of the lake is littoral, meaning it's shallow enough that light can penetrate to the bottom. It has a fine, silty, soft lake bed, so sediments are easily suspended. And we have a flow-through rate, which refers to the rate the water enters from the south end and completely flows out through the north end of about 47 days. So just from this little map here, you can see the deepest portion of our lake is very small, the dark blue. That would be the area that's around 6 to 6.4 meters, depending on the time of the year. And as you head south into the light blue areas, it gets quite a bit shallower. And those yellow dots that you can see down at the south end and along the sort of shoreline are aquatic plants and highly sensitive bird nesting areas. So just an overview of our monitoring program. This map here on the left of your screen shows our 3 monitoring locations. So we have one down at the south end, one in the middle where Windermere Creek flows in. You can see Windermere Creek on the east side just flowing in there. That is our largest sort of creek that enters. And then we also have a monitoring site in the north, which is the deepest location. And so that one is actually 2 sites because we monitor top and bottom in the water column. So we work with local and visiting citizen scientist volunteers to monitor the water quality of Lake Windermere and its main tributaries. So Windermere Creek is the biggest, and then we also monitor Able Creek, which is on the left side, the first one there by the deep site. And so we start monitoring from ice off and monitor right through September or until we have too low of a water level to get all the way down south. So volunteers track key water quality factors like temperature, pH, turbidity, and nutrients to help us understand the lake's health and spot any issues. Additionally, we conduct bi-weekly monitoring as part of the Level 3 Lakes Monitoring Program, which is managed by the BC Ministry of Environment and the BC Lake Stewardship Society. We also partner with Interior Health for E. coli testing on the main beaches from May to September. So the 2 little bays up at the top of the lake there, those are our main beaches, the one at Invermere, and then where the boat launch is. And then we have another main beach, which is off of Windermere Creek, so at the middle sampling location there. So those are the 3 that we would monitor for E. coli testing. Each year we conduct a series of specialized monitoring, including an aquatic bird survey, endangered bank swallow monitoring, and an aquatic invasive species inventory of the lake. And this year, we're actually hoping to complete a baseline native mussel inventory to see what's happening, why our native mussels are in decline. And then finally, every fall, we follow the Canadian Aquatic Biomonitoring Network the cabin protocol to assess the health of Windermere Creek. So some of our main challenges that we face here, the big one is recreation pressure and rapid development. So Invermere is often called Alberta's playground because many Albertans have second homes here. It's an easy drive from Calgary and Edmonton, and the population, which was 3,917 in 2021, can swell to 8 or 10,000 in the summer due to the influx of tourists, most of them coming from Alberta. So this puts pressure on the lake's ecosystem. There's new boat types and increasing boating activities like wake surfing that leads to conflicts between paddlers, power boaters, and these are particularly over safety issues. Climate change is a factor. Our water temperatures are rising. We have seen an increase of 1.7 degrees Celsius since we started monitoring. So this also lowers oxygen levels. Because of our flow-through rate, that probably does save us a little bit, but the lake south of us, Columbia Lake, had really low oxygen levels and high temperatures last year, and they had a massive fish kill, which we believe is because their flushing rate is only 2 times per year. We still hope to do more research on that, but that's what was the cause of it. Another big problem is jurisdiction and enforcement. So government and enforcement are complicated by having multiple authorities here. The Regional District of the East Kootenay oversees our surface waters, while the province of British Columbia manages the lake bottom. Additionally, we have our 2 local First Nation communities who have traditional territories that include Lake Windermere. And then, of course, federal jurisdiction that applies to all the waterways causes a lot of complex regulatory framework, and getting anything done is time consuming. Physical limitations as well. The lake size, it's quite small, shallow depth. It limits its ability to support heavy recreation use without suffering ecological damage. So our key recreational concerns are water quality decline. So boat traffic stirs up sediment toxins, reduces clarity, and releases nutrients that fuel algae growth and disrupt the water chemistry. Shoreline habitat, shoreline erosion and habitat damage. Large waves erode shorelines, increase turbidity, destroys vegetation, swamps nests, and harms fish spawning grounds. Wildlife disruptions, obviously the noise from the props and music and people on the lake, the larger wakes, and then pollution. These can all impact fish, birds, and plants. Propellers and hulls can also injure aquatic life. And safety risks. So overcrowding by the sheer number of power boats on our lake, with large wakes endangering swimmers, paddlers, and smaller boats. And then invasive species spread. So boats transfer invasive species between their water bodies, especially if they have ballasted tanks that aren't emptied. So we do know that shallow lakes are more vulnerable, and confined areas, so we're quite narrow, amplify the wake energies. And soft bottom lake beds are easily disturbed by turbulence and prop wash. So all of these things kind of led to the Lake Windermere Recreational Carrying Capacity Study. This project was designed to investigate the long-term threats from boating activity to lake health, source water protection, and our habitat values on Lake Windermere. So we obtained the services of Lariat Aquatic Consulting and Ecoscape Environmental Consulting. They're both out of the Okanagan and have done similar studies on lakes there in the Okanagan that you could find online if you were interested. And they have extensive lake monitoring and project experience. So our study objectives were to establish a theoretical boat capacity of Lake Windermere using metrics and modeling, to determine powerboat wake impacts, determine the likelihood of sediment suspension, develop recommendations on steps moving forward, including zones where it was appropriate to boat. So looking at the boat survey data, these surveys took place over 31 days across 2022 and 2023. We counted over 16,000 vessels. So you can see on this picture here up at the top, this is just one example of the data that we have. So this includes all vessel types, and it's broken down by weekday, weekend, and long weekend, so from left to right. So just looking at the numbers, anything in the yellow or red zones are getting over the safe boating carrying capacity, which is there on the screen. But I do want to say, if you're interested in looking at the breakdown of these by vessel type, by day of the week, or by time, you can see that all on our website under the study that we've posted on the documents page. But for time's sake, I've just kept it at the all vessels. So just going over some of the data from this, motorized boats of all types surveyed were usually under power. They were most prevalent on weekends, with peak use on weekend afternoons. Up to 28% of our lake exceeded the safe boating capacity on summer weekends, particularly on long weekends. Wake boats were the most common boat type, especially on weekend afternoons. And paddlecraft were less common than power boats. 264 were counted, with fewer observed on long weekends, suggesting avoidance at peak boating times. But usage of paddlecraft was steady throughout the week, unlike power boats. And another trend we found was that the shallow south end of the lake discouraged boating due to the aquatic plant growth. So you can see down at the end, there are no boats counted. So this protects the sensitive habitats down at the south end, but it also concentrates the power boat traffic elsewhere on the lake. All right, so part of this capacity study had a sediment portion. So I'll start off with the hydrocarbon testing. It does get quite complex. We first tested in 2022, and the results came back saying that we had a lot of hydrocarbon contamination in the lake. So they did further testing in 2023. They applied some silica gel and did a bunch of things to take away the sort of non-important things. I know it gets quite technical, so I won't get into it, but basically the main key takeaways are there were no significant hydrocarbon contamination in the lake overall, so that was really good news for us. The marina sediments still had localized contamination, and further testings could clarify the results, but they're quite costly. So on to our sediment metal tests. So most sediments in Lake Windermere are fine sediments. So this increases the accumulation and retention of contaminants. We had iron and manganese levels that were much higher than the regional averages. Manganese was especially high, with 4 of 7 sites exceeding the BC safety guidelines by 3 to 85%. Copper and lead were below the regional average and safety guidelines, but they were close to the warning threshold. So that's the 80%, exceeding the 80% maximum allowable concentration. So not quite a problem yet, but something we want to keep our eye on. Arsenic exceeded the BC safety guidelines at 5 of 7 sites, with levels up to double at the deep levels up to double the limit at the deep and the controlled sites. Nickel was elevated at the control and deep site, exceeding guidelines by 26 and 21% respectively. So looking at the sediment nutrients, at the time of testing, phosphorus levels in Lake Windermere sediments were normal for the region. The high iron levels and shallow oxygenated water limits phosphorus release. However, if the sediments are disturbed by boats, this will release phosphorus back into the water, which can cause harmful algae growth. So onto our sediment sampling. So out of 8 sediment traps that were deployed, only 2 were recovered after a year. Marina 2, so that's by where Windermere Creek comes in, had over twice the sediment accumulation rate of the deep site, which is an unusual result. Usually we would expect to see the sediments concentrate towards the deep sections of the lake. Both of the sites had similar organic sediment rates, but the Marina 2 by Windermere Creek had more inorganic material. So these results are likely due to powerboat turbulence, resuspending sediments coming in from the Windermere Marina, and also sediment input from Windermere Creek. So moving on to powerboat impacts on lake sediments. Wake boats are designed to create artificial wakes for water sports, such as wake surfing. They're equipped with technology to increase wave size, wave shape, and energy. Larger powerboats, greater than 15 feet, impact shallow lakes, with wake boats causing the most damage due to stronger, longer traveling waves that erode shorelines and stir sediments. Ballasted tanks also increase the spread of, or the threat of aquatic invasive species spread. And wake boats, a lot of studies now have confirmed that wake boats stir sediment bottoms down to 8 meters, releasing toxins and nutrients. And that's from the angle of the prop wash. Strong wakes disrupt fish, damage plants, and disturb nesting and spawning areas. Larger wakes pose risk to paddlers and swimmers. We do get reports of our local paddlers and swimmers who were out on the lake and have been swamped by large waves, so obviously a safety issue there. Wake boats often consume more fuel, leading to higher emissions, though this can vary a lot by design of boat, ballast, speed, and hull type. So considering the powerboat infrastructure impacts, boat infrastructures disturb sediments, increase erosion and pollution, and alter water flow. They also block sunlight from aquatic plants and aquatic life. In 2022, we did a count on our lake, and we had 1,367 moorage spots, possibly exceeding the safe capacity of the lake before the marina slips and launched boats were even considered. So lake profile, due to its shallow depths, Lake Windermere does not develop separate warm and cool layers in the summer or the winter. The sediment water interface is warm because it doesn't stratify. So making the bottom water temperature, bottom water temperature is unusually warm for a BC lake. While we don't directly measure it, the warm surface sediments are likely to increase bacterial activity. Temperature trends for our lake, we have a south to north temperature increase. Peak surface temperatures can exceed 20 degrees Celsius each summer. Lately, it's been higher than that. We've gone up to 24.4 last summer. So this impacts algae growth. The warm summer temperatures and the warm water conditions support cyanobacteria, blue-green algae blooms. Sorry, this is quite a busy slide, but we'll break it down here. Lake Windermere has an average total nitrogen to total phosphorus ratio of 39.1. So basically what that means is that it's susceptible to phosphorus inputs. Monitoring total phosphorus levels has met the objectives in most years with no significant trends, but we have seen the limits going up in regards to going over the BC guidelines for phosphorus levels over the last 5 to 7 years. Nutrient concentrations are influenced by the lake's flushing rate. So they're not a strong indicator of lake-wide long-term changes when compared to phytoplankton algae or sediment coring. And we have quite a rapid flushing rate compared to a lot of other lakes. So considering the phytoplankton densities, we measured at 4 sites on Lake Windermere. You can see with little green diamond shape there. So the two main sites that stood out to us was the deep site and the beach site, which you can see there with the large kind of blue-green bar. That's the cyanobacteria count. So the northern and deep site had high densities, which were dominated by the potentially toxic cyanobacteria species. The beach sample, so right in that little cove, just kind of to the northwest there, that sample contained 21,410 cells per milliliter of cyanobacteria, which is very concerning for a main swimming beach. If nutrient levels, especially phosphorus, increase, cyanobacteria blooms could worsen on our lake. And sediment resuspension from activities like boating can rapidly release nutrients, with studies showing that total phosphorus levels increase by 25% after only 2 passes with a wake boat in 4.5 to 7.6 meter deep water. And then Lake Windermere is highly vulnerable to invasive mussels with conditions ideal for their development and habitat. We have the right calcium levels for their shell development, and boats are the primary transporters of aquatic invasive species. In 2021, we did a fisheries assessment on the lake. And it indicated an increased ratio of non-native northern pike minnow. So that's that little fish there down at the bottom of the screen. And it saw a decline in the native red-side shiner in Lake Windermere compared to this same assessment done in 2007. So what was interesting about this is that aggressive northern pike minnow thrive in higher disturbed environments, while the red-side shiner preferred lower disturbed sites. So we did foreshore inventory mapping on the lake, where we identified high ecological importance zones likely to be impacted through intensive powerboat recreation. This was a separate study, but it was used in our in the study for the recreational carrying capacity. So you can also find this study on our website under our documents page if you're interested in reading that. But some of the main points here are the high value kokanee areas. Those are located near the river mouths and the spawning site at the north end of the lake. So you can see that little bit of red just at the very northern tip of our lake. That's where our main public boat launch is. It's quite confined, and that's the main channel that flows into the wetlands. So it's a very sensitive zone. That boat launch should not even be in that location. Native mussel beds throughout the lake, and then the aquatic vegetation and habitat in the south end of the lake. And finally, the actual theoretical carrying capacity. If Lake Windermere were a deep lake, its theoretical boat carrying capacity would be 200 vessels. However, due to its shallow depth, the lake's suitability for motorized recreation is actually much lower. So for power boats, if they were using water deeper than 4 meters, the available area is 43% of the lake, which would support about 97 power boats if evenly distributed across the whole lake. For paddlecraft or swimming, if confined to waters less than 4 meters deep and within 115 meters from shore, about 57% of the lake would be available. For wake surf boats, using water deeper than 6.5 meters with the 150 meter buffer from the shore, the area available is only 4.6% of the lake, and that would support about 9 wake surf boats. And then for active wake surfing, since Lake Windermere and also Columbia Lake don't reach depths greater than 8 meters, zero boats are supported. So neither one of the lakes is suitable for active wake surfing. And just talking about next steps here, there was 2 pages of recommendations that were provided by our consultants for the study. So for time's sake, I didn't include them all here, but you're welcome to read that at the end of the study as well. But overall, it was really well received, despite budget constraints and the vandalization of the sediment traps, which was a really important part of the study. So hopefully we'll be able to do some more sediment studies in the future. Um, this study did gain strong community support, including from most boaters. There was only minor pushback from some small concerned group about potential restrictions on boating or losing their rights to boat on the lake. So next steps for us are going to be to prioritize the study recommendations. Um, support will be there to support a VOR or vessel operation restriction, and offer our resources for its implementation. We cannot apply for it ourselves, but we can support the local governments who might apply for it with our resources and time. Launch an education campaign to raise awareness of boating impacts on our lake, which we've already been starting successfully. Develop maps and designated play zones for recreation. So you can see here on the side, there is a map that's already been developed of the recommended boat play zones for motorized power boats. So this is the deepest section of our lake and where the least amount of damage will be done. So we are going to continue to provide these type of maps to the public and tourists and hopefully create some more material around that this season. We are also going to provide recommendations to our local governments and our decision makers based on the study findings. And with that, I just want to say thank you for listening.
Great, thanks so much for sharing that with us. There are a couple questions in the chat. I invite people to throw any more questions you might have there, or if you need to unmute yourself, you can, of course, raise your hand. One question here from Jerry is, how did you determine the safe boating capacity, which you mentioned was 1 powerboat per 20 acres?
Yeah, so that came out of the literature. Our consultants did a full literature review of everything they could find with similar studies, and that the exact study that came out of, actually, I think I have it here, was from an environmental research and engineering and management firm. The Yeah, it was for that came out of that study, but they did find it in all of the uh sorry, just looking here. Yeah, so she said there is no specific legislated standard for BC, but it came from all the literature reviews that they did while they were preparing for the study. Does that answer the question?
I think so, yeah, thanks. And I noticed in the report as well that that is for lakes with high-speed watercraft, but that carrying capacity, recommended capacity changes if it's a smaller lake with only low-powered watercraft. So it seems like there were a couple recommendations found in the literature depending on what type of watercraft.
Yeah, and each lake that has its own unique conditions, so it's going to change a little bit for each lake. So it should be assessed on each with each lake type.
Great, thank you. And there's another question here. How do you foresee managing this boating capacity? What are the practical options? And I think you mentioned some of the recommendations at the end there. You've shown the map. Any other things you'd like to comment on regarding practical options for implementing or enforcing this?
Yeah, so communication is a big one. Getting, getting this out there so people are aware of it. I think that's going to really help. And also talking with the people who make decisions in our area. We are not responsible for, we're non-regulatory, but just communicating and showing the data with our decision makers is what we're trying to do, and hope that the community decides how they best want to take care of their lake. That's what it comes down to.
Another question here from Kelsey. What are your insights on capacity, if controlled, potentially favoring lakefront boat owners over visitors? Is there any consideration for the impact on people who might just be visiting the lake to recreate versus homeowners?
So we didn't really get into any of that, but there was a lot of chatter going around about things that could be done, like a pay per play or a launch fee at the boat launch, or like a lottery system where people could basically get time on the lake by a lottery system, or give it. There was talk about giving full-time residents preference over part-time residents, but again, nothing has been really taken further than talking about at this point.
And it seems to me like it would be difficult if the lake shore has been developed without this carrying capacity in mind. And as you said, there are a lot of mooring structures on the lake that possibly already would exceed the recommended carrying capacity.
Yeah, we're trying to work on the mooring issues right now. So that's a project that we're tackling this year. And then, like I said earlier in the presentation, enforcement on our lake is really difficult. Who has jurisdiction and whose responsibility is it? Um, it's very difficult. Yeah, something
Mhm.
we always kind of hit that wall every time something comes up.
Mhm. Someone's asking here, would you ever consider closing a public boat launch to wake surf boats?
It could be considered. Again, that's not something that the ambassadors can do. That would be a decision through the DOI, the District of Invermere and the Regional District of the East Kootenays.
And this is a particularly shallow lake, and you said that it's quite close for people to commute to, especially from Alberta. Are there other nearby lakes that would possibly be better options for those larger watercraft that are like deeper lakes nearby, or is Lake Windermere kind of the main lake in the region?
Lake Windermere is the closest main lake from Calgary. And then a little further, 50 kilometers south, would be Columbia Lake. But moving the problem from Lake Windermere to Columbia Lake is just that. They're actually more vulnerable with the slower flushing rate. And they're actually more shallow than Lake Windermere. So we have heard, through the community, people saying, oh, Lake Windermere's too busy. We're going to go start launching and wake surfing in Columbia Lake. And that isn't the answer either. So that's just moving the problem down. But we also have Wassa Lake, which is even more smaller and more shallow than ours, and they are actually having really bad cyanobacteria blooms because of that. So heading even further south, you would have Lake Moyi Lake, which is a small lake, but it is a little bit deeper. But until you get to Kootenay Lake, that's pretty much the next biggest, deepest lake for wake surfing. That would be appropriate for wake surfing.
Gotcha. Okay. Are there any, you talked about invasive species, are there any efforts at the boat launches to install like wash stations or inspections for boats entering Lake Windermere?
Yeah, so we had our province, the province of BC, has the invasive mussel monitoring programs. In 2023, we did have a check station on the Radium Hill coming in from Calgary. And I believe that was there for a few years, but then they did take it out in 2023. So our organization has pushed back a lot with the help of other organizations. And I actually just found out yesterday that they are going to be putting the station back up this year. So it'll be open only part-time, but anything is better than nothing. So we'll see what happens.
Great. Kelsey's wondering if there's any species at risk within the lake watershed that would support implementation of this report's recommendations. You did mention, possible impacts to shoreline habitat, to nests and stuff like that. Are there species at risk in Lake Windermere?
There are. I'm not 100% familiar with all of them yet, but I could find out that information for you. We do work with the local biologist out of Golden. She does a lot of our water birds and species surveys, so I could get that information for you if you'd like more on that. Our bank swallows definitely, they've declined by 98%. So that is a huge one. I know they're working to restore that right now with the province, and also there's nesting sites at Lake Windermere Provincial Park. So they're trying to bring back the colonies there. Um, and I believe there was some dredging that was planned for one of the um, east side communities, and it's been put on hold temporarily. Um, I think there was some issues with the native mussel, like scraping the bottom of the lake bed, because we're already seeing declines in our native mussel. So those are also concerns for us. But I could get you more information on that if you'd like. I'm happy to send that to Brad.
Great, thank you. Other questions? There's lots of questions coming in, so we'll just keep running with them here. So there is another question about, have there been any recreational carrying capacity studies done on other lakes in BC, or were you able to look at any examples of recreational carrying capacity studies where maybe they've been successful with limiting recreation?
So our consultants actually did a similar study on Kalamalka Lake in the Okanagan, and they've done, I don't know if they did a full carrying capacity study on Wood Lake, but they've also studied Wood Lake as well, which is quite similar to our lake. So that would be a good one to read up on. But you can find their study online as well for the recreational carrying capacity study that they did.
Great. Question here from Walt. Are there kokanee spawning in Windermere Lake?
They are working to bring that back. So our Indigenous First Nation communities have taken that over, and we're hoping to see that soon.
There's just a general comment here about Koocanusa Reservoir being possibly a large, deep, and suitable lake for the type of recreation we were discussing.
Yeah, I'm not too familiar with Koocanusa, so.
Okay. Tracy's wondering, how are the fish populations doing in Windermere?
Well, we have been seeing an increase in the non-native fish species. Like I had said, the pike minnow that prefers just highly disturbed sites. They're on the rise, and our native red-side chiner is declining. We're also seeing a lot more bass and our pumpkin sunfish. And a decline in some of our other species.
Yeah, that's interesting. Is Lake Windermere also close to populations of invasive plants like curly-leaf pondweed or Eurasian water milfoil?
Yeah, so we do invasive species inventory on the lake every year, and last fall they did not find any invasive plants in our lake at all. So we were very lucky.
Yeah, it seems like as a shallow lake system, an invasive submerged plant
Mhm.
could have a huge impact on the ability to recreate on that lake. Yeah.
Yeah, especially with the high influx of boats coming onto our water from other places. We do our inventory obviously we can't do the whole lake, but our inventory, we rake at key entry and exit points for boats on the lake. So the key marinas, the busy spots. So we go out for about 3 days and we do rake throws and see if we can find any invasive plants. Again, working with our biologist from Golden. Yeah, so the last few years we've come up clean. We haven't found any, so fingers crossed.
And you mentioned vandalism of your sediment traps. I'm curious, it looks like from the design of those traps, it could also be easy to just lose them in the sediment, in a soft sediment. So, can you talk more about your experience with installing those traps? Like, were they marked with floating buoys and then vandalized from there?
Yeah, so they were marked with signs that had or like waterproof tags that said they were for a scientific experiment with our phone number and some other data. So when they were launched, it has to do with our lake being so shallow you're able to see to the bottom. So you could actually see them in the water if you were a boater. I wasn't here when they put the trap, or I wasn't with LWA when they set the traps or when they pulled them up. So that was just what I was told, that they were able to only recover the two, and because there was no like pieces found, they assumed they were most likely vandalized or removed completely.
I understand. Okay. Yeah, we don't have any experience, or personally, I don't have any experience with those types of traps, but I'm interested because they seem like a really good way of comparing, contrasting sediment settling rates in different areas
Yeah.
of the lake. And those results were quite interesting, comparing the organic matter at the deep spot to some of the marina areas. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah, I'm going to have to look more into that. I think that's an interesting way to measure that.
Yeah, it is really interesting. We were really disappointed that we didn't get the data that we needed. It was a big part of our study for trying to measure the sediment rate from boats versus not. So
I invite people on the call to turn on your video or to unmute yourself if you want to participate in the conversation. We have a smaller group today, so I think I can just open it up to some discussion here. We have a little bit more time left on our call today. I'm curious from anyone on the call if at your lake of interest you're familiar with any conflict between different types of recreation on your lake, whether that's paddlers and motorized watercraft, or say anglers versus wake boats. Does anyone have an experience they'd like to share with the group about conflict between recreation on your lake? Nobody's jumping in.
This is Norval Horner from Gull Lake. Gull, as you know, is a very large lake, but it's shallow. And we are seeing conflicts between wake boats. And, as somebody buys a new boat, it seems they always buy a wake boat. So the number of wake boats on the lake is increasing dramatically. And we are getting pushback from people who canoe and paddleboard that it causes safety issues. I'm quite intrigued by the limit of 20 acres per powerboat. And, technically we're 80 square kilometers of surface area, but a large part of it is too shallow really for the big powerboats. So, yeah, it's an area
Yeah,
the Watershed Society is sort of grappling with.
it would be interesting in Norval to see a similar map developed for Gull Lake as to what actual surface area is appropriate for different types of boat activities. As I understand it, it would be very difficult to enforce, but it seems like a really powerful educational tool, at least to have that map.
I would agree. One of the things that I find interesting is we don't have any kind of effort by the province in Alberta to do any bathymetric work on our lakes. I've done a little bit on our lake, and a large part of it is fairly shallow. But the average wakeboard boat guy, as long as he doesn't hit the bottom, he's not too worried if he's in 4 or 5 meters of water. You know, if you restricted them to 8 meters of water, it would probably end up being about a tiny fraction of our lake that would be usable.
Yeah, and it seems like with the recent declines in water levels at Gull Lake, that maybe historical bathymetric maps might be quite misleading for folks who are using those as tools for recreating on Gull Lake, whereas you've lost so much water that the bathymetry is quite different today.
Yeah, we've lost almost a meter of water. Yeah. Yeah, from our high of, say, 6 or 7 years ago to today, yeah, we would be down almost a meter. Of course, we're trying to resolve that, as you know.
Yeah, interesting. Stan, did you want to comment? I think you had, or was it Stan who unmuted?
Yeah,
Go
hi,
ahead.
Brad. A couple of comments about recreation impact on, I guess, the aesthetics of living by the lake. One is engine noise associated with uh, basically drag boats on the lake that feel the need to go at full throttle up and down the lake. And noise, as you know, noise carries very well across the lake. The other impact from wake boats, particularly, is music, and I don't know if that's similar experience to Windermere, but it seems like most of the people who are driving those boats have hearing deficiencies because they feel the need to broadcast their music at basically arena type levels.
Thanks for those comments, Stan. Yeah, Pam, do you have any experience at Windermere with managing conflict with noise pollution?
Yeah, so not so much with managing it, but part of this study, which I didn't include today, we did a survey from the local community, and one of the main points was noise pollution from wake boats. Speaker noise was a big part of it, and then also just the general noise from so many boats on the lake.
Were any recommendations from that work around, setting appropriate hours or days where noise pollution might be more acceptable than others? Is that a conversation?
Not specifically regarding noise pollution, but we did have talk around limiting different or how it would look to limit boats to or different types of boats to certain times of days and kind of break it up a little bit that way, but not specifically for noise pollution at this point, no.
Got it. Okay. Kelsey, did you want to ask a question?
Yeah, thank you, Brad. And thank you, Pam, for the wonderful presentation. It was really interesting, actually, even just to learn that the average depth of Lake Windermere, I had no idea it was actually shallow, I guess I'll say, because that's very common in a lot of Alberta lakes is, yeah, shallow and quite a bit smaller. And also the flushing, because a lot of our lakes also, where I'm located on Lac St. Anne, it's like 8 to 10 years. So quite a stark difference. And kind of bringing into the conversation the water quality piece. So a lot of our systems are high in the iron and phosphorus. So actually, yeah, I'm not a limnologist by any means. So you noted it's not bound. So when it does get stirred up, it definitely releases that phosphorus back into the system. And we're very prone to blue-green algae blooms. So yeah, just wondering if you have your insights on that.
Yeah, so definitely the iron, like our iron, high iron levels helps bind it. And because of the oxygen as well, we're quite oxygenated at the surface, but below the surface, we don't have, there's no oxygen. Like, so when we start to stir up the sediments, we're releasing that phosphorus back into the water column, which obviously, can drive harmful algae blooms, stir up turbidity, which can release a whole other problem for fish and aquatic life as well. So besides just the phosphorus. Mm-hmm.
For those who were not part of our Wednesday webinar, we did hear from Dr. Chris Hauser on this issue, and we understand that his research lab in Ontario will be looking at the question of impacts of boat activity on lakes related to water quality. So this is a big question that comes up all the time, and we're very happy that we'll get some Canadian research on that topic, hopefully in 2026. If you missed that webinar, that is available on our website. I'm curious from folks on the call as well, is there interest in looking at recreational carrying capacity on some of our lakes here in Alberta, maybe more focused studies? Is that something that comes up at the stewardship level, or is it a question from folks on the call? I have a thumbs up from Dawn here. And from Shane and from Tracy. Yeah, it seems like there's some interest. Blake, did you want to jump in here?
Yeah, I think we're doing some looking at the carrying capacity at the moment on our lake, Wizard Lake. We're quite short and very narrow, but right at the moment the counties are both Pataskam County and the county of Leduc are looking at a focus group at the moment. So hopefully we're going to push them into completing some type of study. As you know, we're really over capacity here for the size of our lake and the wake action as well. So the webinar that we had last week was excellent. We're just going to try and get some more data put together on that and work out the mathematics. But it's an issue for sure.
Yeah, thanks, Blake. That's good to know that that's in the works down at Wizard Lake, which for Pam's information is a very narrow, relatively shallow lake here in Alberta. So not dissimilar from the shape of Lake Windermere. Any other comments from folks around developing recreational carrying capacity models for lakes in Alberta? I know, Pam, do you want to mention again the consultant that you worked with to develop that model? I think you mentioned their name.
Yeah, so we worked with Larratt. So that's Larratt, Aquatic Consulting. And they are out of the Okanagan. And they did the biology portion of this, and then the modeling and sort of the GIS and the technical stuff was done by Ecoscape Environmental Services, also out of the Okanagan. They worked together on this project.
And Neil, did you want to jump in here?
Hi, Brad. Yes, I did. Thanks. Based on Pam's experience, I think it's just a matter of time before all Alberta lakes start to face the same situations that they're facing out there. So any way we can be proactive at all and starting to determine some carrying capacities for any of the lakes. And I think it'd be pretty straightforward. Whatever is applicable to Pigeon certainly is going to be applicable to Wildman, same as Wizard and the rest of them, all the lakes. If we can devise some sort of a formula to determine that, I think would be very, very helpful. As our populations just continue to increase, the demand for our lakes is going to only increase as well. And we've often thought that we need to have some sort of a definitive answer for people, particular developers, as to just what our lakes can handle.
We've had a number of cases recently. I can think of a few, say, Buffalo Lake, Nakaman Lake, Jackfish Lake even, where when there's a development proposal for the watershed, the question from the community that we often get is, can the lake handle additional capacity of people living in the watershed and recreating on that lake? And I think that this type of study would help us answer those questions better, because we don't always have a good answer for that. Dawn, did you want to jump in here?
Yeah, just a quick comment. Looking at old records for Pigeon Lake in the 1970s, carrying capacity was a big issue. The question of how many cottages should be around the lake and what sort of development, et cetera. So that was a big issue in the 70s. People seem to forget about it, and I think we're going to be living with the consequences very shortly. At that stage, they didn't have this problem about wake boats. They had boats, but not wake boats, and wake boats cause a lot more damage because their bowways go right to the bottom type of thing of Alberta lakes. One other comment, I was talking to a guy from Quebec about 10 years ago, and he was looking at Pigeon Lake. He said, in Quebec, they wouldn't allow boats on the lake like this. And I've never found the regulations for that, but just because of the sediment resuspension, they don't allow big power boats on small lakes, shallow lakes.
Interesting. Thanks, Don. Do you know if from the work from the 70s, if a carrying capacity study was ever done, or it was just more of a recommendation that it be investigated?
There were reports on it, but they weren't, I would say, of a scientific standard that would be acceptable today.
Got it.
They just did surveys of what the sediment quality was like, where the reeds were, where the farmland were, where the forests were, and most of all of that is all gone now. So it'd be a completely different thing, and I think the science would be a little different in the analysis part of it.
I see. Okay.
I had a comment on that too, Peter. Yeah. In the 1979 Gull Lake plan, just like Don says, there was an actual sort of limit on the number of cottages they felt the lakes could sustain. But in subsequent plans for the lake, that sort of stuff has disappeared. And I see an interesting potential conflict coming up here between what I call the casual boater who owns a great big power boat and just comes out to the lakes on the weekend and wants to use the lakes versus people who live on the lakes. And I can see an interesting, like I'm sure if Lake Windermere decided to ban access to their public boat launch, there'd be quite a fuss probably. It could be an interesting conflict.
Thanks, Norval. Yeah, I know, Pam, if you want to jump in here, that's great. I attended one of your webinars with the consultants, and I know there were some residents who were feeling a bit threatened by this study. Can you comment on some of the reception to this work? Oh, Hannah, yeah, I think you're still muted there. That's okay.
I thought I had unmuted. Yeah, so overall, reception has been really good to the study from our community. A lot of people appreciate the study and, sort of the data that they've gained out of it about their lake. And it is true, like the majority of residents that we surveyed were full-time residents, and they preferred paddling and non-motorized water sports. We also have a really big birding community out here, and fishing community. So there is a lot more users than just power boaters, and a lot of those wake boaters do seem to be coming in from outside of the area. So there is that conflict, and we did have a group start up last year or the year before, another nonprofit. They're a boating association, so pro boating, which is fine. We're not against boating or anything, but there has been some pushback, not from the entire group, but from a few members of the group as well, who felt like they were losing their right to boat and enjoy the lake, which is not really the case at all. It's just some misinformation and not understanding exactly what the point of the study was. And then I was also just listening to your comment before, and I wanted to bring up that economic point that kind of relates to that. One of their largest concerns is the loss of economic, the economic lifeline to our valley. If we ban boats on the lake or ban wake surfing or surf mode on the lake, that they claim it's going to hurt our economy because we are based on a huge influx of tourists. That's how our area survives. So I was curious to know, like, for some of the Alberta lakes that you're talking about, are they also reliant on economic, funding from boating and tourism as well? Because I know that's like a huge part that needs to be studied before any sort of restrictions can go in. It should be considered.
Yeah. Don, did you want to jump in here?
Sure. As far as economic commerce is concerned, Pigeon Lake really isn't affected by that. The only real economics is property values. So, and I know studies have been done on that, but I think they were biased in one way or the other. No doubt, if your lake turned to a swamp, it would have a different story. The other comment I want to make on boats, one is there's banning them or limiting them. So there's a balance there that I think could achieve the result. And the other thing is that you have to consider invasive species. If you look at the map of the progression of zebra mussels from the Great Lakes down the Mississippi, you can see that these are all transported by, not all, but most of them would be transported by recreational boats. And I'm sure most of them would be ones where they change out their ballast. So we are concerned about, if you want to see a rate really being affected, invasive species is a good way to start.
Thanks, Don. You were cutting in and out there, but point taken. I hear you saying, consideration of transport of invasive species is a huge factor. Pam, it sounds like you do have this data on where boats are coming from into Lake Windermere. You've done some work on that.
Yeah, so we monitor the provincial BC. So they have on their website, you can see where they set up the monitoring stations throughout BC. So we know we have one coming up from Kingsgate, like around the Cranbrook area. And then there's one that's been in Golden. It's moved around a few different locations in Golden. So checking boats coming in from Alberta. So I'm not sure, you should be able to find them on your province's invasive mussel defense website. But I do know something we've been pushing for in BC is Alberta has better, or you've introduced some new fines for people not stopping at boat check stations. So we're pushing to have similar also out here.
Great, thanks. Any other comments on the economic piece that Pam was discussing?
Yeah, Gull Lake would be like Pigeon. We don't really see the casual boater as a major economic factor on Gull Lake. One other point I would make is that, like, I must admit, I own a wakeboard boat myself that I bought like 15 years ago. And it's a relatively tiny wakeboard boat compared to what they come out today. These things are monstrous. And, like 500 horsepower and, 26, 27 feet long and hulls that are 6 feet, high. They've really gotten huge. So it may be that some sort of licensing or regulations is going to be required here. It just seems that, it's gotten carried away.
Interesting.
I think
I know in the United States it's all regulated. The state gets to regulate it, but in Canada, everything is federal. So, yeah, it would be nice to see maybe some of that responsibility transfer to local authorities, either provincial or even municipal.
On regulation, I'm sure there'd be a big kickback in Alberta. I think the best place to start is education. And it's a good time to start. If, as Norval said, if their hulls are 6 feet now, in another few years, it'll be 10 feet.
Great. Yeah, that's really interesting. I know too, for example, Blake and Linda, your lake is in quite close proximity to some boat shops, and so people tend to come out for test drives on your lake with some of these boats. So, proximity to these types of businesses might impact the type of recreation happening on your lake as well. So this does bring us almost to the end of our time today. Thanks everyone who was able to join us. While I close out the webinar here, feel free to comment in the chat if there's any topics that you're more interested in learning about at future webinars, or any topics that you'd like us to continue the conversation on. We're certainly happy to do that as well. We do have additional funding from the Land Stewardship Centre of Canada to continue this webinar series into 2025-2026. And that funding allows us to provide honorariums for all of our speakers. It does take a lot of time to put together these presentations and a lot of time to deliver them as well. So if everyone can join me in special thanks to Pam today for agreeing to participate in the webinar. I have to say, we've been looking for conversations on this topic, Pam, and I was really, really happy to see Lake Windermere take the initiative to hire a consultant and answer some of these questions for your lake. And I think it provides an interesting model for us here in Alberta. I was interested to hear that most of the voting is Albertans actually on your lake, so it feels very relevant to our community here. I see lots of comments in the chat. Thanks, Pam, for the great presentation and insights. Thanks, Pam. We certainly enjoy visiting your lake from Kirsten there.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was great. It's good to talk and get the conversation going. And one thing I did want to point out, we were denied funding from our municipalities for this study. It was a 2-year study that turned into a 3-year study. So it was quite extensive for a little nonprofit to take this on, and our community actually stepped up and donated the funds that were needed for this. So it just goes to show you, like, people do care. People care about the lake, and it's up to each community to decide what's best for them and for their lake. So it's really good to see people, getting the conversation going, and I really hope to see some of you out at Lake Windermere this summer.
Thanks
Just
so
not
much.
wakeboarding.
Just not with big wakeboards.
Got it. Thank you.
Just kidding.
Understood. Yeah. Any suggestion as to a ballpark of what this type of study might cost if we wanted to do a similar project out here?
Yeah, so we did a lot of all of our boat counts were done by LWA staff and volunteers, and we tried to cut costs every way possible, but I think our total bill came in about $49,000.
Understood. Okay, great. Thanks so much for that ballpark. That's helpful if any of our groups on the call today want to put together applications for funding or like you said, fund it from within the community. With that, I will go ahead and end today's webinar, but thank you everyone for joining us. And if you're on today's call, you'll certainly get notification of the next webinar in this Lake Stewardship Community Practice webinar series. So thanks everyone for joining us, and I hope you have a great rest of your week.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, Pam.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
I'll leave this open just for a minute in case there was any last minute thoughts.